Thanks for joining me this week on the show. I have such a special conversation to share with you with a fellow adventurer, Johan Depraetere. He's from Belgium originally, now living in the UK after traveling around the world, letting the little choices, or gummy bears, lead him to the next adventure. So let this inspire you to not say no too soon, but to be open to what's possible. I know you're going to love this conversation. It's time to flip the script on stress and learn how to thrive today and throughout your days. Join me for inspiration and interviews with folks who are shining their light in the world in the areas of positive mindset, health, and well-being. I'm your host, Susi Vine. Let's get happified. Welcome back. I'm thrilled to have you with me this week for a conversation that I know you're going to find at least a little bit inspiring. I am joined today by Johan Depraetere. His journey has taken him from his roots in a small town in Belgium to professional football before a business career with companies including Samsung, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, Procter & Gamble. A true modern nomad. He has lived across 3 continents in Brussels, Boston, New York, Barcelona, London, and Seoul, and has traveled to just under 100 countries. Johan is the co-founder of Energy Equation Partners, an investment firm focusing on energy transition, and still finds time to coach scientists at Cancer Research UK and is a mentor for the social enterprise On Purpose. Johan's new book, Pick Your Gummy Bear, published this spring, is an ode to the incredible ways in which our choices shape our lives and the life lessons we learn along the way. Johan, thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
As a small town girl myself, in your childhood, could you have ever imagined the places that you would have gone and experienced to be at this point in your life today?
Never in a million years. But that's how life unfolds, I guess, for each of us.
And so how did you come into this space? I mean, I think I can say for myself, there have been a lot of chapters that I never would have chosen or written for myself, but here we are. I do think it kind of moves in concentric circles. How did you come through this journey to be in this place where you are? Did you ever see yourself mentoring people and providing inspiration to people in the way that you have now that you've completed this book?
Again, the answer would probably not, although I think I've always been, I would say, interested in not only exploring this planet and this world we live in, but also kind of the inner journey of discovery of who we are as human beings and what makes us wake up in the morning, what excites us, how do we, you know, better understand ourselves. Because we go to school and we learn about history and geography and mathematics, but they don't really teach us how to figure out how our brain works and how our thoughts work or how our emotions work. And so that was always a parallel journey in addition to the professional and the family one that was always there, and I always was interested in people, not just myself, but what makes other people tick, behave the way they do. As you probably know as well, a lot of things are outside of our control and anything can happen anytime. And it's just becoming more aware of that reality and say, I cannot control that. I can just control how I react in that specific situation. And so over time, it kind of builds, and that inner journey became stronger, as it tends to be as you grow older. And I have to say, the book in itself required probably a big shift in the way I saw myself in the world, because I used to be quite discreet. I, at some point, deleted all my Facebook. I got off LinkedIn and said, listen, I don't want any identity out there. And unfortunately, or fortunately, it's just the book comes with a reversal of that view of the world, because now I'm not only out there, I'm out there with 12 very personal stories of my life that I share with the world. And some people might like it and some people might not like it, but there's nothing I can do about that. So it's been a very fascinating journey. So it's a very kind of a long answer to your question, but it's as you say, these dots connect over time. And I say, listen, yes. And this book just appeared because to give you a bit of background, I went back to school a few years ago and I really fell in love with writing. And I wanted just to continue to write. And a good friend of mine said, well, you should build your support system, either hire a coach or a therapist. And I ended up finding this amazing creative coach who just helped me on this path of writing and what I call finding my inner voice, because that was part of this creative journey. And then about 7, 8 months in, this book emerged. And that's where I really started working hard at the book and really had to work on myself and say, it's one thing writing it, but then are you ready really to push the button and put it out there? Anyway, that's the journey of why I'm here in front of you.
Well, I think everything you say is so relatable. And I know it's really going to land with the people who are listening because starting out, we think, success is kind of clear cut. If you're successful at school, if you're successful at setting goals, if you're successful at checking things off a list, then that's what that's going to look like. And there's all of these soft skills that we start to become aware of that have nothing to do with that kind of formal definition of success. And they matter more and more, at least in my experience. Now, categorically, people might look from the outside in and say, well, what success do you have to show for it? But I have a life that's full of the things that light me up and joy and friends and connections. And, you know, maybe people see it as trade-offs, but I think that we start to realize it's okay to put less importance on the things that other people deem valuable. And I love the permission that you gave yourself to kind of follow your curiosity and let yourself be guided back into school. I've reinvented myself a couple of times as well. And to just let yourself be open to the process. And now that this has come forward, say, okay, I guess I'm the steward of this work. And personally, I also relate pretty strongly in wishing that I could unplug from the social media, the online presence, and go back to being comfortable at home and in my small community. Maybe that's our roots, right? And small town connections and feeling like we have close knit circles and kind of keeping things quiet. And so I love that you are letting yourself be guided by this process and saying, this book came forward, it has somewhere it wants to go. And so here you are making yourself available to support it and let this journey begin. And it sounds like such a wonderful way to make it personal, to share these 12 stories from very different aspects of your life and share the insights that I'm sure throughout this varied career and experiences. I'm sure you're not talking American football. I'm gathering soccer,
Soccer,
as
that's
we
correct.
say.
Yes.
So, from a really athletic focus to being in business rooms and living that life and consulting in different ways, some people might feel like they've made choices and they're stuck with the choices that they have made. They have to keep on living out the weight of those. Do you have any kind of insights or inspiration perhaps to people who feel like they've worked themselves out of having more choices or if they're overwhelmed, how they might move through those?
So the book actually is all about those choices. And the way I talk about it, the gummy bear, it's almost like we have, I think, two types of choices in our lives. And there's a framework, but before I talk about the framework, I distinguish between the green gummy bear, which are the big, bold moves, the career moves, even moving country, commitment to relationships, either entering or exiting. Those shape the trajectory of our lives. I also discovered by writing this book, there's the yellow gummy bear, and the yellow gummy bear is a very subtle choice that is available to us. But both are driven by this kind of inner instinct, that inner voice, not the inner critic, which we can come to, but more kind of the where it comes from. Like you said, you've built a life on things that you like, that give you energy, that give you flow. They come from inside. Nobody will impose flow on you. That's not how it works. And in order to do that, you have to get to know yourself. And there's many ways we can do that. But going back to your question on the yellow gummy bears, they're little nudges, little signs that appear on your path that either you pay attention to and you say, am I just too busy with other stuff and I don't hear or see these signals. Or actually, oh, this is now the third time something pops up or somebody talks about doing this course or trying this. And the yellow gummy bears won't change your life immediately, but they will let you enter a door that you don't know what's behind the door. And then you will discover a world, and maybe there's suddenly 10 new doors. And so, in short, I think we are so conditioned and so busy these days that we lost touch with that inner instinct and also our ability to pay attention to the signals that appear. Now, the question is, do you pay attention? And so, for the listener and even for myself, even, it's never too late to make choices. It's never to make both the green, but especially the yellow ones. It's just, I got into cycling by accident. I used to be playing football, and then I was still on Facebook, and I saw a friend doing a charity ride from Paris to London, and for Room to Read, which is a charity, US based, which I really like. And something connected with me. Now, I could have ignored it and say, okay, I've never cycled Paris to London. That's 3 days. It's about 60 miles a day. And the most I cycled was 10 miles. But I did jump on that. And I said, okay. And then I didn't even have a bike. So I had to buy a bike. And before I knew it, I fell in love with cycling. And now it's a simple example, but it's just one example that in my case worked. And there's quite a few of those. I'll tell you another one, which has to do with my wife. There's two very special stories. One, so I lived in Seoul for 9 years, and that's where I met my wife, who's South Korean. Now, the night we met, I did something, and I give away a bit of the secret in the book now, but Korean, I don't know if you've been to Korea or to Asia, but it's a very different culture. It's fascinating, and I love the people and the culture, but there's certain norms and processes you follow when you go out. So we were going out with some colleagues, and we had a drink in a bar. And normally, when you go out, you don't split the bill. You don't do that in Korea. Normally, it's the most senior person or the oldest person who would pick up the bill. And my wife was in the same room, so we started talking. Now, I was the oldest, so at the end of the night, I secretly went to pay the bill. And just that fact, which was almost not even a yellow gummy bear, but it was a very small yellow gummy bear, gave a signal to my wife that actually not all the foreigners pay Dutch. There's some of them that are able to kind of understand how the Korean way of doing things is really important. And so that one moment, if I hadn't done that, I would say it's unlikely I would be sitting here being married to my wife. So it's not always the bold thing, but it can be very critical. The other thing, which is around, especially speaking from a business person, how I got into my creative part of my life. We went to Tibet, which is a fascinating place to visit. It was on clear on my bucket list because it's, Shangri-La. It's just has all the aura. And after the holiday, we came back, and I had a small camera, and some of the pictures turned out to be beautiful. But at the same time, I think you go to Tibet and all the pictures you take are beautiful, I thought. But my wife said, why don't you do an exhibition? I said, an exhibition? I work for Samsung. I'm not a photographer. But she kept nudging and pushing me. So there's the whole angle of the gummy bear, not for yourself, but how can you create a space for other people, for them to also kind of make that little move and give them the just enough pressure and tension. Say, why don't you try it? And so she was consistent, and I said, okay, let's do this, but let's raise money again for Room to Read and other charities. And suddenly I was out there. My pictures were out there, and people bought my pictures, and we made postcards. And so once you start thinking about all the things that are around us and all the things that maybe you've put off because what are people thinking, or don't have time, or I'm afraid to say those are just excuses. So it's really, what really have you been dying to do, or trying to something new, or just find something that really connects with who you are as a human being. So anyway, again, it's a kind of multifaceted answer, but I think that in short, the term agency is very powerful. And I think we put ourselves in our own prison and we forget that we have more agency than we think we do.
I think that's a really beautiful answer. And I think that your yellow gummy bear analogy is perfect because those are the kinds of little internal questions or hits, things that come and grab our attention. And then the logical brain or the left brain says, no, that's not for you. That's not aligned with what we're supposed to be doing, or, that'll take us off track. And I think that's a really wonderful way, really beautiful reminder. These little choices, when we don't say no, can really pivot us just the way we need to be to something we can't even imagine, the opportunity coming forward. As I was looking through your website, I was enjoying those very photographs. And what a gift that your wife gave you just enough nudges to support you in coming out in a whole new avenue of creativity. And so many times, especially now that pictures end up on our mobile phone, they sit on that phone and we might never look at them again. So
Mm.
just revisiting them then is able to become a gift to other people who might never have the time, the resources to travel to Tibet and have a taste of that magic that you experienced when you were there. I think there is some magic in those little things that seem to come out of the blue. Like, how could this bicycle ride that sounds kind of interesting now become a way for you to support something that you feel passionately about and meet new people and have fun along the way?
Yeah. And the thing with cycling, it's almost reconnecting with my younger self when I was playing football, because I know I discovered by playing soccer early on in my life that feeling of flow, of being in nature, of doing something that just happens magically when it just flows. And cycling has reconnected my full being, especially my physical being, with that moment. And I didn't stop with just road cycling. And then as I'm very curious, and again, I didn't eat one little yellow gummy bear for the cycling. I then also said, let's explore track cycling, which is, I don't know if you know track cycling, but you basically go around in circles on this very unique bike with no brakes and with no gears, and you have to constantly pedal. But for me, that's the perfect setting to be in flow because you just go around and you can't stop cycling. So you have to be very focused. And then, so I do that. And then you know, I'm not a mountain biker, but I got a gravel bike. Suddenly it allows me to get into nature, which again is almost the opposite of track cycling because track cycling, you know where you're going, and gravel biking, you don't really know what's around the corner. It could be a single track, it could be a lake by for all purposes. So you have to be very awake. And so it's become an integral part of my life. And it's almost like I call it my well-being barometer because if I've not been on the bike for a while, I feel it's my body's not happy because it's not been able to release the stress, the tension to be out in nature and outside. So it's only when you try it that you then realize there's a lot more to it than what you initially think.
Yes, the collateral benefits are much greater.
Yes. Yes.
And yes, I do. I think it's fascinating how when we find whatever it is that helps each of us drop into the flow state as it is for us, it's so encompassing. And I think that really gives us the, not to be confused with green gummy bears, but the green lights to say you're on the right path. Like the senses kind of kick up an extra level when you're
Yes.
in that sweet spot. As opposed to, you mentioned a few moments ago, when that inner critic kind of pops up and starts to try to rein you in. Do you have any kind of advice or your experience in navigating that, moving past or acknowledging that inner critic without letting it hold you back?
So I use the phrase befriending your inner critic. And I use that term because the inner critic is always there and it's there for a reason because it made us survive many moons ago when danger was there and say, listen, don't do that because you might die. Now, unfortunately, we've moved on, but that inner critic, I think, is still conditioned for a different era. So I have a few things that I've done. I think one of the most important ones is as you try new things and eat gummy bears, unfortunately, none of them will work out. So you will fail. So the question is not to use failure not to eat any more gummy bears. It's just to retrain your inner critic and say, listen, failure is going to happen. It's okay. We will have to learn to live with that. And let's may see next time, maybe we'll do a slightly different choice where we mitigate the risk a bit, but we'll still make a choice. We'll still go for it. So I think that's one of the things. The second thing that I've really enjoyed, but also helped me to train my inner critic and befriend my inner critic is to explore new ground. And what I mean by that is do things that you just don't know what they will bring. And I always use the example of backpacking. If you've never backpacked and you never done free flow traveling, I don't say you should do it because some people might not like it. And initially, I came to it through a yellow gummy bear, and it was fantastic because it's one of the things that you know, sleeping in youth hostels is not for everybody. But the free flow travel is something that puts you into an environment where your identity doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean your job or your family or even your food. It's if you're in Bolivia with a backpack in this beautiful scenery with the local people, you're just a human being. And so the critic is lost because the critic doesn't know what to say, or they might say, well, that's dangerous. Yeah, but maybe it's not dangerous because the critic has never been there. So that's a second thing. The third thing is going back to the creativity and the artists. I think the artists are masters of working with their inner critic. Initially, they will just go and create, and the inner critic is very quiet because they put them to sleep somehow. But then once they start producing, whatever it is they do, the inner critic becomes very active because then it's, how do I make this piece better, whatever piece you're creating? And so you have this dialogue conversation between the inner critic and the artist saying, listen, yes, this can be better. Let's change this. Let's do that. So there's ways to do that. And then the final two, which they're all, for me, important. The challenge is for each individual person to find what works is I wouldn't call them personality tests, but I don't know if you know the Enneagram, which I think is a fantastic tool, is where's the root of the inner critic? You know, where's that coming from? Because we are born with certain traits, I guess we call them, and some of them have a stronger inner critic root than others. So once you become aware of that, then you can actually name it. And if you're, for argument's sake, I think I'm not a perfectionist, but if you're a perfectionist, clearly you'll have a very strong inner critic. So once you're aware of that, it's going to help you. And then the final moment, and there's a chapter on that as well, which is my meditation practice, is to really just observe your inner critic and realize, in essence, that you are not your inner critic. Your inner critic is just a flow of thoughts that appears and will disappear. So again, what do you do with these thoughts? You can identify and say, I am my thought, I am this inner critic, or you can say, no, these are just thoughts that come and go. And so my meditation practice, which I now do daily, helps me to really quiet down and settle and also go into a different type of flow state because I think it's not a physical flow state. It's a different type of flow state. So that I think are some of the ways that I found very useful and effective for my befriending of my inner critic. But he's there or she's there. I don't know. They are there. I just need to know when and how to use them.
And I love that you frame it that way, befriending your inner critic, because I do see people really struggle with trying to turn it off or ignore it. And then it gets louder and it gets into this whole adversarial kind of relationship with ourselves. When, as you say, it really is a fundamental and very effective biological aspect of humanity. We learn from these things, right? And then it's trying to protect us. We're trying to grow. It's trying to keep us safe. And it can be hard to take the training wheels off. But I love what you're saying about putting yourself in situations where suddenly it doesn't have the context, doesn't even know what to warn you about because everything is a new and novel experience. And I think a lot of people are afraid of change. And I think in order to really step out into an adventure without an itinerary, you have to be able to make friends with change as well as with your inner critic. Do you have any words of advice for people who, and certainly in the age of vloggers, there are people putting up videos and they step out and they travel the world. And then there are people at home watching this and saying, oh, I could never do that. I could never do that. But to find that aspect of yourself that can move past the fear and embrace the unknown and be more available to those yellow gummy bears that are along the way.
Just like we talked earlier, I think it's very dangerous to, and especially in today's world where we have overload of information and everybody's vlogging and you can see all these things. And I think there's some of the people that inspired me along the journey. I put them on my website as well, but there's a professor from Yale, Laurie Santos. She has this 5 million people who took her course on Coursera on happiness and well-being. And one of the other traps that we fall into is that we compare ourselves with others. That's not a recipe for happiness or well-being. Now, why I say that is I think there's two key dimensions for the question you raised. Is one, we all have we're on a spectrum of our comfort zone. And that's why we can't compare ourselves. And I write about it in my book. I long time ago, my aunt in Belgium, was a very small country, but we moved from where I was born in Flanders, close to Brussels. I remember when I was young, she was still in Flanders, and for her, going to Brussels was an expedition. She couldn't do that. And I was, I don't know, 7 years old because we had moved. I would go to Brussels. And so I could not understand the big deal she made of it. So we have to be very careful that we can't project on other people what our comfort zone is. And so it goes back to how far do you push yourself? But then if going on a hike, a 3 hour hike in nature is something that is really adventurous for you, then maybe you should try that. And maybe you go with friends or you find a way to get out there and get out of your comfort zone. While if for somebody else is go and trek in Nepal, that's and it could be two people in the same family. One loves to just for them going out on the street 3 day or 3 hour hike for an hour outside is a big deal because there's mosquitoes and there's whatever there is in terms of fear and acknowledge that while the other person is okay and can go to Nepal. But it's where are you on that spectrum? And then if there's one thing maybe for the listeners to remember is ask yourself the question, why not? Rather than why or how. And if you're at that crossroad and you have potentially a yellow gummy bear, say, why not? And even ask, what is holding me back to make this small step? Because in that question and the answer sits a lot of information to say, okay, maybe I'll make the jump and I give it a go. And then once I do that, I'll make another one. So that I think it's all based on who we are as individuals. And then the other one, which is related to that, is, as I said, there's this inner journey, outer journey, but also I like to do my best to be the best person I can be in this world. I was born, this life is a gift, it's a mystery, but I want to know who I am and I want to give it my all for myself. Initially, you do it for other people, all the things that we do for other people to shine or to prove that we are good enough and all these things. But at the end of the day, then you realize actually we need to find our inner engine and our inner driver. But then some people don't really care about that. They just want to go to the beach and have a good time and not worry about meditation or what's life all about and that's fine as well. So there's no right or wrong. It's what do you want to do with this life that was given to you?
And I think that's really important It can be a big turning point. Maybe a green gummy bear, maybe yellow. When we stop making the choices, stop living the life that we might have adopted through the influence of our family, social circles, societal expectations, we go along and we buy into this picture and get very convinced this is what we want, this is what we're aiming for. And then suddenly those yellow gummy bears start to open up our eyes and we recognize there could be something completely different that is much more magnetic and appealing and fulfilling. It can be hard to make that shift. And I love what you're saying about when we feel overwhelmed, when an idea comes along and we say, oh, I could never go backpacking in Tibet or Bolivia. The language, that this, all the reasons why we can't make a big choice. And so I love your suggestion to ask, why not? To, instead of trying to tackle with the big question, I feel like asking why not starts to bring it back down into smaller, less overwhelming choices or answers that then we don't feel like we have to have the whole solution, but we can just start moving forward in the journey and keep answering why not? Why not this? Why not that? I think that's a really wonderful place to engage. And I love creativity and opportunities for wonder. And so maybe that's what appeals to me about the why not question. It feels like a wondering.
And absolutely. Yes. And that's how you then approach life rather than say, I want to control everything, because that's just unfortunately not possible.
Yes. Yeah. I hate to break it to anybody who's still out to control all of the factors and have everything within check. But I think that learning to let go and to be present in the journey, as you're talking about, I was thinking about that with the different forms of bicycling. There's the track racing where you're in a groove and you can take your focus more inward because you don't have as many unknown factors. But to balance that, with cycling on trails where you're present in the moment because anything could be around the corner. Those are both such important skills to be able to carry in
Yeah,
the right
no,
timing.
that's a good summary. Yes.
Is there anything in the book that you hope as people are reading the stories? I already think that it holds lots of insights and inspirations. Storytelling is such a beautiful way to just let these kind of insights come to you, and it feels so much more relatable in storytelling fashion. And is there anything that, as people are reading through your book, you're hoping that they're taking away with them?
So I think that the question of why not is probably on top of that list. I think the a thread of impermanence, because we tend to live life like it's gonna go on forever, and that sometimes causes us not to make choices because we think we'll have plenty of time. I hope that the book, and I didn't mention it, but there's the final two chapters are actually the most personal ones, and also the more, what's the word, deep, because I lost both my mom and brother very quick period to cancer, but they were very brave in the way they passed away, and there was a lot of beauty in the sadness as well, if I can use those words. And they also taught me a lesson. Probably I wouldn't sit here if that hadn't happened, because it just for me was also a wake up call that, and the chapter of my mom is saying anything can happen anytime. And that's another lesson. That's what I'm saying. We think we control our lives, but at the end of the day, we don't. And we control certain elements of them, but a lot of them we don't control. So just be prepared and start changing the way you see the world, not just physically, emotionally, mentally, because we are multidimensional human beings. And I think, unfortunately, these days we all live way too much out of our head. How do you make it more balanced? For me, the book, in a way, was the first real work I've done straight from my heart in terms of work, because it does come from the heart and it was hard work. And so, how do it's much harder to do that in a professional setting, especially in the business. So, that's probably another one. And then the final one, which is not scientifically proven, but I think we tend to focus on let's call it the 99.9% of choices we make to organize our life. to make sure we have food, to get the kids to school, to send emails, pay bills. And that's very important. We need to do that, and we need to make sure we organize ourselves. But then there's the gummy bears, the 0.1% of the choices that really make a difference. And somehow they all get blurred and we don't really pay attention to the 0.1. Both the green ones are there, so that, yes. But the yellow ones, no, the yellow ones, we tend to ignore them. And before we know it's too late. And I wish I've traveled this, or I wish I took this class. And before you know it, it's too late. So I think it's saying, listen, life is a gift. Yes, just like I'm not a Buddhist, but I like Buddhist philosophy. Suffer will happen. There will be things happen that unfortunately will hurt us and give us grief and pain. So let's work on the element on how to deal with that and not fight it, because fighting it is also not really a recipe for long-term well-being. So I hope the reader will use it as a mirror to reflect on their lives and say, oh, I can recognize myself here, or yes, I've wanted to do this forever. Maybe it might give that little nudge that they were waiting for to go and make the step forward.
Yes, because as you say, we tend to think we have more time than we might. We don't know. And in the name of playing it safe, we might think, oh, I need to do this to prepare to make that choice. I need to take care of this first. I need to finish this chapter of my life before I open a new one. And we don't know. And this moment is the biggest gift. And so I love that. I hope your readers and our audience do take that inspiration to look at these opportunities, these questions and choices as invitations instead of, oh, I can't even. We try to say, no, not yet, not for me, not now, that's not right. And leaving ourselves open, I have always found leads to the greatest gifts. So I hope that
Mm,
inspiration lands with folks.
good. And I think in your life, you've taken quite a few gummy bears yourself, I believe.
Perhaps more than my fair share, but hopefully that inspires others to give it a try. And you do on your website. So we'll have the information in the show notes, but the resources page is really marvelous, really a wonderful little collection of gems, a bit of a library. If you don't know where to begin, try this. Brene Brown's TED Talk and Vulnerability is there, as well as what you've already mentioned, and so many great things to kind of spark ideas. Is there anything on that page? I'm sure they're all favorites. That is how they got there. Is there anything on that page that comes to mind at the moment? We'll send folks to check that out.
I would say there's no real favorite. I think there's two I want to highlight. One, it's almost a suggestion or a tip that I found it very useful to have this is the first time I put part of my little library there, but it's build your little library, because we don't have to do it all by ourselves. There are great people out there who have words of wisdom. Now, it's one thing to hear the words of wisdom, it's another thing to actually act on it. So my meditation apps are there. I do both of them. I did Vipassana. So all of these things in my library, I've tried at least, or I continue to try to implement and practice on a daily basis. And then the last one, if you like music and you like a bit of a more eclectic world music selection, I have my playlist at the bottom of music from all over the world. And so that, in a way, also represents me, as because I think, just like my book, I see it as my energy transformed into words and now flying around the world, hopefully inspiring people. But music is energy too. That's why we connect with it. And that's my little curated list of music that just goes straight to my heart. And I hope that also can inspire some people and bring some joy to their lives by listening to the tunes from. And even sometimes it's funny because there's quite a few songs on there I don't even know what they sing, because it's in a language I don't speak, but it doesn't matter.
It's all
So
in the sound and the vibration. And as you were telling us the story of being open to travel, being open to learning things about new cultures, and being aware of the nuances and how that lined up to bring you to connect with your wife in an otherwise perhaps very passing sort of a connection. It was able to get deeper. So saying yes and being open and being fully present, I think, is such a powerful look at how well it worked out for you. I hope she
Still,
agrees. I'm sure she does. She realizes how lucky she is. We all need a cheerleader to have our back. And I'm grateful that she inspired you to share your art and probably talked you through a couple of the tough chapters in the book, too, to keep you going on that track. This has been such a delight. Thank you for joining me on the show. I'm thrilled to have you with us, and we'll have a link to your website, Johan Depraetere. Please say it yourself, my dear. You say it so much more gracefully than I do.
no, I will not. You did it perfectly.
All right, we'll have a link to your website and folks can check out your book and start the adventure in your armchair at home, but hopefully that will inspire those inspired choices, all the gummy bear flavors that are available for tasting.
Amazing. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. Take good care.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. You'll find all the resources we discussed today online at happifiedlife.com, along with links to subscribe to Happified on your favorite player and a handy search tool so you can search all of our previous episodes. Help us grow by leaving a quick review and share this episode with a friend. Until next time, keep on shining.